Was King Arthur a real person or just a myth? We all know the story. The shining city of Camelot, the noble knights of the Round Table, the magical sword Excalibur, and the wise wizard Merlin. It's a tale that has captivated us for centuries, a symbol of chivalry, justice, and a lost golden age. But if you peel back the layers of legend, what do you find? Is there a real man buried beneath the mountain of myth? Let's find out. To start, we have to travel back in time, not to a magical kingdom of towering castles, but to a much grittier and more chaotic era, 5th century Britain. This was a period of immense upheaval. The Roman Empire, which had ruled Britain for nearly 400 years, had withdrawn its legions, leaving the island vulnerable. The Romano-British people were left to fend for themselves against invading Anglo-Saxon tribes from the east and Picts from the north. It was a dark age, a time of constant warfare, where local warlords and chieftains battled for survival and control. This is the world where the historical Arthur, if he existed, would have lived. He wouldn't have been a king in the medieval sense, sitting on a grand throne. Instead, he would have been a battle-hardened commander, a warlord, a leader of men in a desperate struggle. So, where do we look for evidence of this figure? The first clues are not in epic romances, but in dusty, ancient texts. One of the earliest sources that mentions an Arthur-like figure is a work from around the year 540 by a British monk named Gildas. In his sermon, On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, Gildas writes about a major victory for the Britons against the Saxons at the Battle of Mount Badon. He credits the victory to a skilled and noble leader of Roman descent named Ambrosius Aurelianus. Interestingly, Gildas doesn't mention the name Arthur at all. This has led many historians to wonder if Ambrosius was the real figure who later inspired the Arthurian legends. He fits the profile, a Romano-British leader fighting back against the invaders. The name Arthur first appears a few centuries later, in a 9th century text called the History of the Britons, traditionally attributed to a Welsh monk named Nennius. This book is a collection of stories and historical fragments, and it's here that Arthur steps onto the stage as a military hero. Nennius lists 12 battles fought by Arthur. He describes him not as a king, but as a dux bellorum, a Latin term meaning leader of battles, or warlord. He says Arthur fought alongside the kings of the Britons, but he himself was the supreme commander. The final and most decisive battle on this list is the very same Battle of Mount Badon that Gildas mentioned. Nennius claims that in this battle, Arthur single-handedly killed 960 men. Now, that number is obviously an exaggeration, a piece of heroic storytelling creeping into the historical record. But the core idea is there, Arthur as a great British war leader who won a crucial victory against the Saxons. Another early Welsh text, the Annal Cambria, or the Welsh Annals, also mentions Arthur. It contains 2 key entries. The first, for the year 516, records the Battle of Badon, stating that Arthur carried the cross of Christ on his shoulders and won the day. The second entry, for the year 537, records the strife of Camelot, in which Arthur and Medrawt fell. This is the first mention of the fateful battle of Camelot and of Medrawt, who would later evolve into the treacherous Mordred. However, these annals were compiled much later, and historians debate whether these entries were added in retrospect to incorporate a hero who was already becoming popular in Welsh folklore. So the earliest historical traces point to a figure named Arthur, a successful British military commander active in the late 5th or early 6th century, whose primary achievement was halting the Anglo-Saxon advance for a generation. This historical core is very different from the later legends. There's no Camelot, no Guinevere, no Lancelot, and no Holy Grail. The Arthur of these early texts is a warrior, not a chivalrous king. So how do we get from a gritty Romano-British warlord to the shining knight in armor? The transformation happened over several hundred years, as storytellers, poets, and writers each added their own layer to the legend. Arthur became a hero of Welsh folklore, a symbol of resistance and lost glory. Poems like Why Gadarin mention his name as a benchmark for bravery. He was the hero who, it was prophesied, would one day return to save his people. The real game-changer came in the 12th century with a writer named Geoffrey of Monmouth. His book, The History of the Kings of Britain, published around 1136, was a medieval bestseller. It was a sweeping, epic, and mostly fictional account of British history. Geoffrey took the sparse details about the warrior Arthur and completely reinvented him. He made him a great king of Britain who not only defeated the Saxons, but also conquered much of Europe. He introduced familiar characters like Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, the wizard Merlin, and his wife Guinevere. Geoffrey gave us the story of the sword Caliburnus, which would become Excalibur, and the final battle at Camelot where Arthur is mortally wounded and taken to the magical Isle of Avalon to be healed. Geoffrey of Monmouth's work was pure historical fantasy, but it was incredibly influential. It was translated and adapted, and it laid the foundation for the Arthur we know today. French poets in the late 12th century, like Chrétien de Troyes, picked up Geoffrey's stories and added their own romantic flair. Chrétien introduced the concept of courtly love, the castle of Camelot, the character of Lancelot, and his affair with Queen Guinevere. He also started the quest for the Holy Grail, shifting the focus from military conquest to spiritual adventure. These French romances were then translated back into English. Sir Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur, published in 1485, is perhaps the most famous compilation of these legends. Malory brought all the different threads together, the warfare, the romance, the magic, and the tragedy into one epic narrative. It's Malory-esque version that has most profoundly shaped our modern understanding of King Arthur and his world. He cemented the image of the Knights of the Round Table as a fellowship of the best knights in the world, bound by a code of honor. So, when we ask if King Arthur was real, the answer is complicated. Was there a medieval king named Arthur who presided over a court at Camelot with knights in shining armor? Almost certainly not. That version of the story is a literary creation, a product of centuries of storytelling. However, was there a real historical figure at the core of the legend? That is much more likely. A Romano-British warlord, possibly named Arthur, or perhaps someone like Ambrosius Aurelianus, who led a successful resistance against the Anglo-Saxon invaders in the chaotic period of post-Roman Britain. This man was so successful, so heroic that his memory was preserved in folklore. Over time, his story was embellished, romanticized, and transformed into the enduring myth we love today. The legend of King Arthur isn't just a story about a single man. It's a story about hope in a time of darkness, a symbol of civilization against barbarism, and a vision of a just and noble society. The historical Arthur may have simply been a man trying to defend his home, but the legendary Arthur became a king for all time, an idea that continues to inspire and fascinate us. He represents the ideal leader, the perfect knight, and the dream of a better world. And that perhaps is the real truth of King Arthur. He may not have been a king who held a court at Camelot, but he has become a king in our collective imagination, reigning over a kingdom of stories that will likely never fall. The search for the historical Arthur continues, with archaeologists and historians still digging for clues, but the power of his legend is undeniable and as real as any historical fact. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history and myth. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Arthur a real person? I'd love to hear your theories. See you next time.